Hello and welcome everybody to our I3 lecture series, hosted by the Masters in Digital Photography program at the School of Visual Arts. We are thrilled to have Clayton Patterson and Julian Voloj as tonight's guest speakers. Clayton is a Canadian-born artist, photographer, videographer, and folk historian. Since moving to New York in 1979, his work has focused almost exclusively on documenting the art, life, and times of the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Clayton has documented the drag scene and gangbangers, was CBGB's unofficial videographer, co-founded the New York Tattoo Society, and famously filmed the Tompkins Square Riots, footage of which was recently used in the Joker movie. Julian was born in Germany to Colombian parents. He is an award-winning author and photographer whose work has been published in the New York Times, Washington Post, Rolling Stone, and El País, among many others. In 2012, the German consulate in New York showed a 10-year retrospective of his photography. Around this time, his artistic focus moved to graphic novels. Coming from a photojournalistic background, he gravitated towards nonfiction narratives. His debut graphic novel, Ghetto Brother, NBM 2015, illustrated by Claudia Allering, documenting the 1971 gang truce that led to the creation of hip-hop in the South Bronx, was praised by Junot Diaz in the New York Times as one of the best books of 2016. This was followed by Joe Shuster Paper Cuts 2018, illustrated by Thomas Campi, and Basquiat, Self-Made Hero 2019, illustrated by Soren Mosdal, which all received great critical acclaim. Please help me welcome Clayton Patterson and Julian Voloj to our lecture series.
Thank you. So I will start. So we have the, everything is under the three I's today: ideas, images, inspiration. And so we'll start off. It's also like free structure. So the first part is a little bit the background, the ideas where Clayton and I come from. So we're both photographers, very different in our approach. We'll show some of the images that we have. And then the last part will be dealing with the graphic novel, which really combines both of our art. It's about his story, but also the way we use storytelling. And hopefully this is a lot of inspiration for all this who are here. Jaime, SVA, thank you for having us. And Jaime spoke a little bit about my background. So a lot of my personal background is also reflected in the projects I'm having. So it's interesting when we talk about, just to understand where I'm coming from and how my artwork reflects it. So biographical details, of course, already mentioned. I was born and raised in Germany. My parents are Colombian immigrants, being Jewish. So all this really is the inspiration for having identity as like a central part of my work. I mean, a lot of the work deals with identity questions. Cultural memory is also a part. And so the broader work, is basically under the category storyteller. So as a writer, as a photographer, I'm a storyteller. So it's often from a photojournalistic background. And with this, let's go to show a little bit the work. So when I moved to New York, I was very fascinated by the Jewish part. I grew up in my hometown had 80 Jews, clearly a minority in Germany. The Holocaust always played in identity questions. And when coming to New York, the greatest Jewish diasporas, it's like the totally opposite. So my first bigger project that was shown in 2005, 2006 was a series called Forgotten Heritage. For this, I revisited former Jewish neighborhoods of New York. And as the context, so in Europe, when we have former Jewish neighborhoods, it's nostalgia because the subcontext is the Holocaust. So the absence of Jewish life, of course, has to do with the genocide. In New York, it's something totally different. So it has to do with changing the demographics. And there is not such a nostalgia in New York because just, it's a fact of life. People move, neighborhoods change. So what is interesting for me, I wanted to approach New York the way a lot of photographers approach Europe when they come and visit former Jewish neighborhoods. And my black and white photography really reflects a little bit this nostalgia element. So I revisited a lot of Jewish neighborhoods. I started with the Lower East Side, and that's how Clayton and I met first. Went to places like Brownsville in East New York, Harlem, the Bronx, and really documented Jewish heritage. So let's go for a few of the slides. So this, for example, what we see here is the rooftop of an abandoned synagogue. There are two synagogues in Greenpoint. They're next to each other. Like the old joke goes, if you had two synagogues built on a lonely island, one is where you go, one is where you don't go. So this is a rooftop of the abandoned synagogue that is more of a storage for the other one, and the skyline of New York that is probably done like 2005 was also used on the cover of the book Jews of Gotham. Here, this is an interesting image. Here we find a cemetery. So cemeteries, of course, are always places of Jewish remembrance. This here actually is in Chinatown. It's between two tenement buildings near Chatham Square. Most people don't even know it's there. It's the oldest Jewish cemetery of the United States, dating back to the arrival of the first Jews in New York in 1654. Here we have, in the Bronx, this building actually was recently renovated. It's a former Hebrew Institute of University Heights. Also around the corner from the birthplace of hip hop, and we speak about hip hop in a bit. Staten Island, so this is on Victory Street, a former synagogue. This here, Clayton might know this building. You know where this is, Clayton?
I think it's on Forsyth Street in the corner of...
Exactly, absolutely right, yes.
Yeah.
It's a former synagogue and now in his Hispanic radio station, so on Forsyth. Yes,
I didn't know it was a radio station, but a church for sure.
Yeah, it's a church, but it functions also like the largest Hispanic
evangelical.
Yeah, I think something like this. So yeah, but I thought like the contrast between like the Star of David and the cross was very fascinating for me. And here Bet HaMidrash HaGadol. So this actually was meant to, I mean, it's a historic building. Interesting enough, the murals in it depict actually Jaffa, Tel Aviv. Normally, murals always depicted Jerusalem. This was meant to be.
I don't see that. Where are the murals?
So if you see on the left and the right of the bima, so you have the ark.
Okay. Yeah. And they don't have the zodiac going up above. Where is this?
This was actually on Norfolk, but this building actually was the one that burned down. It's around the corner from where you lived.
I photographed that building before. Okay, so this is, what year is this? Like 98 or something like that?
That's later. I think it's like 2006, 2007. No, it must be before. The exhibition was 2007. But yeah,
that's a very interesting history that nobody's really covered. That's a good one. And that place was beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, it was an amazing place.
A miniature Al Orensanz.
Absolutely.
Came out of Cologne, and that was 1848. So this is around that time. But this is a miniature of Orensanz's. This is a great photograph. This is classic.
Thank you. Yeah, so I mean, in a way, it's fascinating because if these buildings were anywhere but New York City, they would be landmarked, they would be preserved. But you know, that's such a building in the Lower East Side.
But that was the whole struggle. And those are fluorescent lights on the wall. I mean, get that.
Yes.
That's incredible.
Exactly. So yeah, so this building, so in a way it also illustrates, because a lot of my photographs were like a race against time, because often, you know, buildings were repurposed, they were torn down because real estate in New York don't know what's going to be in the future, but was always very hot in the last 15 years. So, so this series was actually like published also, and it was meant to be like part of like a larger book project I wanted to do. Unfortunately, because of like some financial things, it never became a book, but it was shown in a few spaces.
How many pictures did you take inside there?
So inside this synagogue particularly, I think probably like close to 100, but the whole series was close to 2,000 photographs. So I photographed nearly, I would say over 600 different sites in all 5 boroughs. So it really was like a long-term series that I wanted to develop further.
Danny Stein's got the mother lode of Lower East Side Jewish Orthodox history, and nobody will pick up on that. So for all those photography students out there, the whole thing with Danny Stein and Jewish history, Lower East Side, synagogues and Jewish life, Orthodox, that's the mother lode. Drugstore developed, but classic photographs. classic. And these are gems. These are great.
Thank you.
The
So,
electric heater.
so from this series, I moved to a series that didn't just deal with places, but also dealt with people. I mean, the idea was really doing like a series on Jewish identity because, you know, after all, it's New York City. It's the only place in the world where you can have such a street sign. And this is not Photoshop. This is really existing on the Williamsburg Bridge. So one of the questions also stemming from my own background. So I have part indigenous relatives who converted to Judaism. I have like Catholics, Jews, everything. So the question was really, who is a Jew? And so for this, I really wanted to do like a series on diversity because after all, it's New York City. And New York City in itself is super diverse, but also, of course, the Jewish community of New York City is very diverse. And so I really started to meet with different communities. And one of the first communities, I mean, I lived at that time in Greenpoint in Brooklyn, was Williamsburg, the Jewish community, the Hasidic Jewish community. So I was very fascinated by this whole idea of ultra-Orthodox Jews, Hasidic background, to be like between tradition and modernity. So I did a whole series going to, this is in Bobov, Borough Park, a Bobov yeshiva for youngsters. So I went to Borough Park, Williamsburg, and Crown Heights and met with communities over and over and really to understand them better. And interesting also, they're not a monolithic group. I mean, they're in itself very diverse. This, for example, is a gathering of Chabad emissaries. So once a year they come together. And so this was actually an interesting thing because they had a few photographers there and they set up letters so that you can actually go on a ladder and be, you know, up and photograph them. And I really wanted to do something different because everybody was taking the same picture. So I actually sat down in front of them and wanted to have a shot up. So I have not seen anybody doing it from this angle before. And so it really feels like a sea of people. In today's days of social distancing, this is a picture. I don't know when we'll see this again, probably not for a while. But yeah, it's a very fascinating picture. This is in Crown Heights, taken in 2007. I know this because 3 days later, my first son was born. And here, another picture of a scribe. And I feel like a lot of these pictures are fascinating because these are pictures you would associate with like the life in Eastern Europe, but this is really like, you know, life in New York in this day and age. So it's not the past, but really right now. From this, I went to a totally different community. So these are Black Israelites. So these are self-identified Jews. And again, it's not a monolithic group. And there are like different streams of it. Some are more radical. Some are more trying to become part of the mainstream. Fun fact, actually, Michelle Obama's first cousin is a rabbi of an Israelite community in Chicago. And so the same thing, I went to these groups. I basically showed up there in St. Albans in Queens, introduced myself and spent like over 6 months with them, coming over and over again, interviewing these people, trying to understand, you know, what made them tick, what are they doing. And for me, it was also interesting because I'm not a religious person. I don't speak Hebrew. And, you know, I was with a group that is very observant. They're speaking Hebrew, but, you know, people would question, of course, their identity versus questioning mine. So it's an interesting juxtaposition in that sense. And my favorite event with them was actually, so for the Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah, they actually have an outdoor service near Costco in Queens. It's like this random park. I think it's called Rainy Park. It's near for those of you in New York, near the Noguchi Museum. And yeah, so they have these outdoor services, which are really fascinating. And like hundreds of people come dressed in white, drive there and there. This was the start of my exploration of like Jewish diversity. And I had access to some more prominent people. I mean, we have here former Mayor Ed Koch, photographed actually around the corner from Clayton. So this is actually,
yes,
you know what it is.
I see that.
Yeah.
Rabbi Rothberger was the last rabbi at that synagogue.
Yeah, which is also luxury condos today. It's also not a functioning synagogue again. Was actually probably my worst photo shoot because he had a really bad temper that day when I had to do this photo shoot with him. Yeah. And really didn't really want to do it. So this was actually the last picture I took of him, and it actually worked out. But I was like, really, this is not going to work out.
You still have the Kiss mural on the bar. On the
Yeah,
corner.
that's true. Yeah, exactly. So that's also gone. Yeah. Then so for here, less prominent, but also very very visible across the Russian Jews. So I went to Brighton Beach and I photographed at a whole series of war veterans, World War II veterans. Very fascinating photo shoot with them. It was, I think, probably 90 degrees that day, and I had a translator with me. I speak some Russian, but not that well. And these guys, I mean, it was very hot, but they were in the uniform. Some were in the uniforms, all had their medals, and they didn't break a sweat. They knew this is serious. We want to have these pictures done. So it was a really wonderful photo shoot in Brighton Beach, and you see Coney Island in the background.
Yeah, it's classic.
And
the classic.
And so during this series, I came across this gentleman, Benjamin Melendez, Puerto Rican. He is part of a group called the Bnei Anusim. So his ancestors during the Inquisition hid their Jewish identity, and secretly their Jewish traditions were passed from generation to generation. He was also in the 1970s a gang leader and the founder of a group called the Ghetto Brothers. And in 1971, he initiated a gang truce. And after this gang truce, a culture developed in the South Bronx, and he definitely was very instrumental in creating the environment for this. And this culture is today known as hip hop. So for those of you who know the movie The Warriors, you will probably not be aware that The Warriors is actually based on this 1970 gang truce, 1971 gang truce in part. I mean, there are different sources, and the movie has less to do with the book, but the movie definitely has a lot of references to the real gang truce. So here we see Benjamin Melendez in the Ghetto Brothers colors. Yeah, the colors is basically the name of the gang jackets. And so meeting him, and we became friends and talked over many, many hours, and probably we spent like hundreds of hours together. It was really interesting because, he was Jewish, Spanish speaking. We really became friends. And I was so fascinated by his life stories that I was considering doing a series that I dubbed From Gangs to Hip Hop. There was also a documentary by Pop Master Fable that was a work in progress that had the same title. Never really happened, unfortunately, but I want to just share a few of the photographs from the series. This, for example, is from a hip hop gathering in Harlem. So when we think about hip hop pioneers, we think more about like the later people who have like, the Adidas tracksuits like Clayton right now. But there was a generation before that was more affiliated with the gangs. So the B-boys and so on had like strong overlap with the gang culture. Here is at one of the jams. The nice thing also, which unfortunately now is not anymore as much the case as it was before, but there was a lot of grassroots gatherings of people from the pioneer generation who didn't make it big, who still, live in the same neighborhoods. And these people still had hip hop parties with a lot of the pioneers just showing up. So you could experience the real, OGs, so to speak. Here we have Grandmaster Flash at one of the jams. Actually, I really like this portrait of his profile. And so with this whole thing, more for myself, for fun, I played with the photographs and created what is called fumetti. So the word fumetti is Italian and means basically speech bubble. So I used some of the photographs I took from the Bronx, from the neighborhood, and created like a short comic basically made with photographs. More as like an experiment in storytelling. Having pictures of Benji and this scene. I mean, we see here on top left the Boys and Girls Club at Hoe Avenue, where the peace gathering took place. Next to it is African Bata, one of the pioneers. And then, pictures, some of them actually, the bottom left one, of course, is a picture that I started the slideshow with, and then Benji's photograph to tell like his story. But there was so much more to this story. And at that time, I connected with an old friend of mine from Germany, Claudia Allering. We had done like a project together, like an illustrated poetry book. And with Claudia, we really didn't know if it would lead to anything. We did the graphic novel, Ghetto Brother, which was over 5 years of work. I mean, she really did an amazing job. We created a very like noir feeling. And the nice thing is we did a few like events and people were sharing like old photographs, shared their stories. People were very generous about like sharing materials that we could use for illustrating this book. This here, for example, is an overview of gang members coming to this peace meeting. And interesting enough, this was also like a point where after the book was published, I reconnected with Clayton, who years before we worked on a book documenting the Jewish history of the Lower East Side, but Clayton also, and we'll talk about it in a bit, documented, of course, the gang history of the Lower East Side. So both the interest in the gang stories brought us back together. Clayton has a podcast that you all should check out. And on his podcast, he often invited gang members. I was able to bring Benji over. He had Karate Charlie, another person that was there. So really, Ghetto Brother was like the first large graphic novel, and was very fortunate that it was very successful, was translated in a few languages. And since then, I've done a few books, as Jaime mentioned. The latest one was on Basquiat. And you see it's a very different style, coloring. And
I just want to add with the Ghetto Brothers, Julian's got it translated into 6 different languages.
Yes.
Portuguese, French, Italian, German, English, and Spanish, I guess. One other.
Spanish it was, yeah, exactly, yes. So the Basquiat book, thanks for the prop here. We tried this before, so he knows exactly when to praise me. No, thank you, Clayton. So here you see like a very different style. It's colorful. It's very Basquiat-esque in the illustrations. So as you can imagine, for every graphic novel, the visual language of the storytelling has to reflect what the subject is. So, the Ghetto Brother style would have not fitted for this, but this is really like a very Basquiat-esque scene here. By the way, the scene that we see here is that an ex-girlfriend actually burned some of his buildings. And so in this illustrations, the soul of his art actually comes to life. So with this, we actually get to Clayton. So Clayton and I, we're friends for close to 15 years or something. And as Jaime said in his introduction, I mean, Clayton had really a fascinating life. He really covered so many aspects, and we'll learn a bit more in a second about him. So I was thinking, how would we do this storytelling wise? And so before we go into how we dealt with Clayton's story, we want to introduce him a little bit more to you. And so we will watch a little clip here from a documentary about him called Captured.
You could almost be anybody you wanted to be on the Lower East Side. If you want to dress up as a woman, you could dress up as a woman. If you want to be a skinhead, you could be a skinhead. I always had sort of an interest in preserving history.
Looking out on the street, it's like being in an aquarium, and when I look out on the street, I see this activity all day long.
From a filmmaking point of view, it's great. You don't have to go very far to get a really good shot.
The art scene in that crime-ridden area was really exciting, really vibrant.
Here we are in the Lower East Side of New York City. There's a lot of things we all saw, but we wouldn't really see it if we pulled out the camera.
Quality of life was not high on the agenda, and you could see it. It was not a pretty picture.
People laying too dead to the needle out of their home. They never cared, because it didn't matter down here.
Now, to the real community of the Lower East Side, come forward! Stand right here for this fucking yuppie stuff!
There's been so much change. He's documented that religiously.
We have a right to have these documents.
So tell us about the videotape that you took. What? What are you saying to me? What are you saying to me?
A camera became such a weapon.
He refused to hand over his videotapes. I got more cops in trouble than anybody in the history of America with those tapes and substance tapes.
This is a revolutionary tool. Little brother is watching Big Brother.
I'm giving that a life, a breath of fresh air, a place in the universe.
So this is really the moment where we should all basically clap, because really it's fascinating. His archive is amazing. I mean, Clayton is a videographer, photographer, and I think no one in the last 30 years has documented the Lower East Side more and really as diverse as the Lower East Side is. Because if we think about the Lower East Side, of course, we think about like the immigrants, turn of the century, but there is so much more history to it. So with this, we want to show you a little bit of Clayton's work. We start with a series called The Front Door Photography. So Clayton, tell us a little bit how, how it came about with the series and what it's all about.
Yeah, this is called the Front Door series. There was a book out by called the Front Door Book, and it was done by Oh Wow. They were in Florida. And I photographed in front of this door, probably have taken well over 10,000 photographs. And it really captures a whole period in time. And some of these people I caught when they were kids, and now some of them have grandkids. So it's a whole multi-generational thing in the Lower East Side. Large part Hispanic, of course. And it just shows the people. And, these are the Bangladesh down here, and I've still photographed. And these guys are still around. These two guys are like the falafel guys. So they have a falafel shop down here. And I've watched them grow up and have photographed them over the years. And, a lot of the tags on the door were sort of from that period, FOS, Flip Out Squad, I put, so we had the Wall of Fame, which was the door, and the Hall of Fame, which was like, I would take 32 pictures, put them on the, in my window. I had a 1-hour place that would develop my photographs. And that place was really important because they did a great job. They were down in Chinatown. And you get a roll of film every time you develop some film. So this way I kept the whole process going. And this was Avenue D Terrace. That was a crew. They got into a beef with another crew, one crew, WON. So there's a big history down here with all of this. And the door, between the door and the pictures. And you see tags. I mean, Lower East Side is known as graffiti, but these were tags. So tags were very sort of like territorial. So like there's Fridge, he was 3rd Street. You see the caps that are out there now with Avenue C, Avenue D, all of that. That's Fridge, he's still out there doing this thing. All this history. There's J1 again, that was Avenue D, ADT. So, and this was a drug dealer from my end of my block. They sold coke. But it was also a bodega. So we used to go there, and the Dominicans sold the coke and a lot of the bodegas. So we'd go there and buy our milk and whatever. So we were cool with them and whatever.
So we should also mention when it's called Front Door Photography, this is your front door. So you live there. That's your front door.
Yeah. So that was the front door. So all of it is a context. The photograph, all of it is the whole thing.
So I want to add for those people who don't know this. So Clayton lives at 161 Essex Street, and his place is really like a community center for the Lower East Side. So people come there, and it's always, right now, of course, it's not as possible, but every time I'm at Clayton's, people knock on the window, come in. So really his place is also a gathering place. And we spoke earlier about understanding communities, and really Clayton's place became like a community center. You moved to the Lower East Side in 1979. To this place, when did you move to Essex Street?
We moved to Essex Street officially in 83. So I started the window in probably about 86. So I've done it kind of religiously for, well over 30 years. And, a lot of these kids eventually went on and grew up and, became different things, pay up sucker. I always like that little graffiti guy there with a gun. And so the door has been up now with this skeleton for about 15 years. I'm looking at maybe doing VR from 333. So VR might be doing redoing the door. Okay. So that'll be classic. That'll be 333 crew, which is, and I hope to get Fex in there. FEX. He was like Flip Out, BBB, the Broome Street Bad Boys, and also FOS.
Mm. It's also fun for me to see that the door always changed. Like every few pictures, it's like a different background. It's colored, different graffiti, different inscriptions.
Yeah, people basically respected the door. They didn't really there weren't beefs. I always took pictures in the window, and the idea was always to make them look good because I didn't want any beef. So, it's all like a one-to-one. So, when you photograph these guys when they're kids and then you get them older, when they're older, it's kind of, part of it's like John Gotti's Neighborhood, it's kind of like that. Some of them went on, became Head Bloods, Head Crips. A lot of different programs came out of the Lower East Side on all kinds of levels. So to have that whole sort of cross-generation, and that was Morris, and that cap was the Hagler fight. That's one of the original caps that Ben made. I have a couple of those. That was the shop that made the Clayton caps. Now the graffiti in the background here is really unique. This is Red Ed, eventually Eddie Braddock III, eventually Carol Ann Braddock now. And it's supposedly you can tell Wall Street. He did Wall Street. So this is the Dow at that day, at that time. So supposedly you can go into Dow Jones history, look up that number, and know the time and the date of when that graffiti took place. Huh. So it's a whole other form of graffiti, which only Red Ed did. And this is 1331, 86, I guess, 87 here.
Oh, yeah.
Something the Dow was changing. Another kid I got over the years. So this thing went on for years, and to get the people as they changed. I remember one girl, I didn't get her all the time, but she was going through like junior high school. And one day she was like a princess. The next day she was like hardcore. The day after that, she was like punk. It was like, you watch these kids that go through all these different sort of generational changes. It was really incredible.
Mm. So another series I love is your photographs of the drag scene. So how did you get into the scene?
Oh, I got into that through a guy called Peter Quayloff, who eventually changed his name to Sun PK. And he was played music, and he was a drag queen. And so he got me in there on Sunday nights, which was Whispers. And that was Happy Faces night, and basically at the Pyramid. Whispers. And so, and the whole idea of Kember came up with this word availism. Kember Fowler from the band Karen Black. So this is Peter. So he lived above a fabric store. So this is a lampshade. And then he'd go to the fabric store and could buy all this fabric for like $1 a yard. Bella Fabrics, 112 Stanton Street. And so he made all these costumes, and he would make the shoes and match the jewelry and the headpiece and the makeup. And he would create all these characters. So this was a whole different form of drag. This is the drag that actually RuPaul came out of. Now, the big connection for me, this is John Sex. He was really famous. He was very famous with, the 8-7 Club. He was like the Keith Haring, Madonna, John Sex. He was like the Vegas player. And he was really talented. And he was a great performer. He died early with AIDS. And he had his hair done by Ethel Eichelberger, who went on and became also a very famous drag player. So John Sex, Sun PK, Happy Face, Taboo. And this was the basement of the Pyramid Club. And this was outside where Whispers is. And so I went there every Sunday and photographed them getting ready to do Whispers. So this was one of my special collections that was great.
And it's really something that, is, I have not seen anybody with a collection as extensive as you. And this is a culture that today doesn't exist this way anymore. I mean, this was really like a very do-it-yourself culture. So it's wonderful. Yeah. And I really hope that we, one day we'll be able to like publish this as a book, because it's really something that doesn't exist anymore.
No, absolutely. And all of this, like the fabric, it all came from Bella's Fabric. And there's Sun PK again and Dixie, and they're performing Sunday night for Whispers. So I'd bring the fabric, make the background. This particular guy, that's Mr. Fashion, Gerard Little. He's really another famous drag queen from there. Ron Magliozzi, the curator of film at Museum of Modern Art, really likes Gerard, Mr. Fashion a lot.
So around that time, you also switched from photography to videography, right?
I met Nelson Sullivan there in, I guess, 86. And Nelson, it was,
Tell us how you got to videography, how you switched.
Yeah, thank you for bringing Nelson up, because I always like to mention his name, because it's the person who opens the door for you. Once you're inside, then you're a player. But once you're a player, you're just another person on the board. but it's getting through that door the first time. And Nelson was the one that introduced me to the video camera, and I got it within a minute or less. I mean, everything that I do, I want to, part of the message of my photography, my videography, and all of that is anybody can do what I've done. All of my stuff is commercially available. The 1 hour developing place, the camera, all commercially available equipment. Good equipment, but commercially available. And so and that became part of the legacy of the video camera, because I was the person that sort of broke that mold for the video camera to be now holding the system accountable. Little Brother's watching Big Brother and all of that, the Oprah Winfrey Show, getting that message out, which eventually turned into Cop Watch. And we inspired the Young Black Panthers and a lot of people within the, especially inner city, to hold the system accountable by using photography and video. And my introduction to the video, really, which all of it came through the Pyramid Club, the hardcore scene, which was Ray Bees, who was security there, and Jimmy Gestapo from Murphy's Law, Warzone and Murphy's Law. So that opened that up. But meeting Nelson changed my life, and he showed me within a minute or less what was involved, and that's all I needed. But I always have to bring it up because he got me there. This is Lip Sync. Lip Sync was another drag queen. So this, again, gets back to the idea of the independence. Now, parts of Trump that I like the expression, let's make America great again, because we should make America great again. America really was great. I feel I've lived the American dream because of all of the adventures I've had and been able to do. And it's about the independence. It's about small businesses. It's about the little guy. America was made great because of the little guy, pulling yourself up by the bootstraps. It's all about the opportunity to make something happen. And when New York was really percolating, and it was, that we got jazz out of that, we got modern art out of that, we got Jackson Pollock, we got Rothko, so much of that. And so much of it came through the Lower East Side. Rothko had a studio on the Bowery. Jackson Pollock lived in the Lower East Side for a while, the whole 10th Street School. I mean, so much of that art history and cultural history of America comes out of the Lower East Side. And these were the drag queen series. And prior to me was somebody like a Nan Golden. Nan Golden was doing really the more sleazy side. I always wanted people to look good and to look great. So these are like, a record and some fabric turned into a bow with a little other extra material, and all that costume was made. Then the red lipsticks, the earrings, all made to go into the photograph and into the character. And it was all made for cheap. It was all available. These were all independents. It was independent movements. It wasn't Starbucks or Nike or international corporations. It was the independents.
Yeah.
So much photographic history started on the Lower East Side. Now, this is Cochise, the president of the State and Center Nomads, and he gave me access to that club. And that was incredible. This was the last street gang on the Lower East Side to wear colors. So this jacket on the outside that you see are colors. Now, the swastika wasn't meant to be anti-Semitic. It was meant to be antisocial. I mean, all those Puerto Ricans that grew up on the Lower East Side, they all worked for a Jew at one time or another, or lived in a Jewish building or something. I mean, the place was, one of the beauties of the Lower East Side was the compatibility factor. So this was meant to be antisocial as a statement.
Yeah. It's also interesting.
We did the street gang history of the Lower East Side. I'm sorry, Julian, go ahead.
No, I think, I wanted just to pitch that also you and Cochise. So Cochise was in jail, he's out now, and you guys worked on a history of gangs on the Lower East Side. I mean, this was one of the connecting points between the two of us.
Yes.
And also, I feel like one aspect is interesting because, like, I delved into communities to understand them better, spent a lot of time. You did the same. You were not an outsider. You came in, you observed, you were always open to different cultures.
And all of these pictures have a tremendous amount of information. That photograph of on Norfolk Street of the shul that eventually burned down that Julian has at the beginning of this, if you compare that photograph to Orange Sand Center, you'll be photographing a form of Jewish history and Jewish modern history. The beginning of the, after the Orthodox, what do you call the new, the Reform.
The Reform,
The Reform movement. The Reform movement started in Lower East Side. This is Michael Wilson, who was also Jewish and bisexual. And there's a person called Ethan Hill that's doing a documentary on one of the first people he came to in New York was me, because I was the president of the Tattoo Society, and he wanted to be the illustrated man. And he eventually got more tattoos, and he hooked up with Mike McCady here, and Mike McCady did his head, and they had head tattoo and all of that. And so this is Michael Wilson, the Illustrated Man. Now, this is part of the whole transition period of tattooing when it started breaking much more into modern art and much more into high fashion. And Michael and them were now starting to become models for like Joe Boxer boxing shorts and like that. So this was the beginning of the sort of tattoo and high culture.
Yeah, we'll talk later when we go to the graphic novel. We'll talk a bit more about the tattoo society. But I think for me it was very interesting because I was not aware that tattoos were illegal in New York for a long time, and you basically fought, and thanks to you and other people, you know, tattoos became legal again in New York.
Well, Wes Wood from Unimax was very highly responsible, myself and Catherine Freed, our city council person. And my point between that and Michael Wilson, this is the enigma, the great enigma, the puzzle man. I hooked up with him at a show called Wild Style and Tattoo Messy, and that's another whole history. And that's with Johan Ur, and that's Tattoo and Wild Style, which is another big history, which will be in this book that I'm working on. My point is, all of these pictures have content. They're a lot more than just a photograph. They're a photograph and a history and a neighborhood. Most of it's connected to independence. Wild Style and Tattoo Messy is an independent show created by Johan Ur. Enigma, his whole performance is himself, his tattoos, he's his own business. Julian, graphic novel person, publisher, myself, artist, a cat maker, whatever.
So I want to actually say,
it's all about independence.
Yes, and I want to just point out he wears a Clayton hat. Tell us a bit about the history of the Clayton hat, and you wearing, of course, a Clayton hat yourself. So
that's right. And that was really thanks to Elsa and a small shop on Avenue A. And there was an old guy there, Jewish guy, one of the last Jewish businesses that was still surviving in the garment industry at this period of time, which was 1986. He was older and getting ready to retire anyway. But Koch, when he came in his first session, early 80s, late 70s, garment industry was #1. When he left 3 terms later, garment industry as mayor, 3-time mayor, garment industry was finished. So all of New York voted twice to a referendum not to have a 3rd-term mayor, and Bloomberg came in, spent the money, ripped everybody off, and bought himself a 3rd term. So money can buy anything in New York. He bought a 3rd term. But anyway, all of these photographs have content, and a lot of it's related to small business, the independence, in a way, anti-gentrification, all about saving America as we knew it.
Yeah. I want to show a few more examples of the hats that you did. When did you start with the hats?
So anyway, we found this old guy who made caps. That's Keith Haring. This was one of the first baseball caps we made with Ben. This is Ben's embroidery. Now, Ben, we found out, he made the baseball cap. So we went there and we got a baseball cap. He made the Duran-Hagler fight one, the one that older gentleman was wearing. And this was one of the first tries with this. And this was Keith Haring, who had been my neighbor on Broome Street, 325 Broome Street. So I realized that Ben could not only make a cap, but he did the jacket backs for the Savage Skulls in the Bronx. So I realized he could do a drawing. So I asked him if he would do the drawing on the cap. And there you can see where he sketched it out. And that was the first Clayton cap. And that was with Ben doing it. Then Elsa we bought all the machinery by 1986, 87. We were doing it ourselves. Ben retired. And this was Matt Dillon. Every time he made a movie, we made him a cap. And so this was the Irish. There was some movie in with a shark. I don't know. I forget the whole movie.
And as like a little, pitch here, because Clayton is actually, you're reviving your hats, right? You now started again to do Clayton hats.
Yes, we have a nasty site with Ray Felix, and he's a great comic book artist. So we're also supporting the independent comic book people.
So yeah, so hopefully some people will check out your Etsy site and order some caps. Tell us about this picture here. It's a very iconic picture of you.
Oh, this was the first Ai Weiwei photograph that he got in the New York Times. And this kicked Ai Weiwei. Actually, he followed my videotape style too. And I'm using the camera as a weapon, as an aggressive tool. And he ended up with the same problem I had. I ended up getting beaten up by the cops and ended up being arrested a bunch of times.
Yeah.
I have to step off to the side and help out for a second. I'll be right back.
Yes. Okay. I just want to then show here. That's a picture of Ai Weiwei that Clayton did a while back. It's an old picture of him. So I mean, for me, the fascinating thing is that Clayton really was, you know, in the Lower East Side when it was the epicenter of culture. I mean, you know, Blondie, Keith Haring, Ai Weiwei, you name it. Everything was happening around him. But he's still there. While a lot of people moved on, some died and so on, he still is there documenting it. So with this, you know, it's very fascinating because his experience is so diverse. So there's so many little stories, be it like, you know, the drag queens, the gangs, the drug scene, the tattoo society. So when I started to think about, so first of all, for the process. So like with Benji Melendez, Clayton and I met up once a month for over a year, and I interviewed him for like an hour and a half, and we always focused on one aspect of his life. So I realized that there's so many different little stories. And so one idea is to reflect the diversity of his experience. Unlike other graphic novels where there's one illustrator telling the whole thing, we divided it up among different illustrators. So we have, I think, 17 or 18 different illustrators working, and every person focused on one aspect of his life, be it his childhood, experience as a teacher. So the experiences itself are visually different, and we'll see a few examples of this. Right now we see here this cover, and if you see, it says download the app RT Vive. So when you download this app and hold your phone on top of this cover, and you can find this image online on the publisher's website or on Amazon and so on, you will actually be able to see a virtual reality and augmented reality video of Clayton. So you download the app, and maybe some of you do it right now while we are talking, and you can even experience it. You get like a nearly 3D image of Clayton. Like if you think about Help Me Obi-Wan Kenobi, My Last Hope in Star Wars, it is the same thing, but it actually looks much better because it's in color, and it really was done by something local. So we approached, there is now, I mean, the Lower East Side is changing, and there is now a virtual reality film studio. Apparently, they told me it's the first virtual reality film studio in the US. It's called Jump Into the Light. It's like, you know, 5-minute walk from Clayton. We went over, we spoke with them about this idea, and so they created a video that when you take the app, hold it on top of this cover, you'll be able to see Clayton. And I thought that was very important that people could actually see Clayton, and the idea of, in our very innovative storytelling, to use like augmented reality. Clayton, I was just talking about the cover and Jump Into the Light.
I know, I was going to say I'm also a caregiver, so once in a while I have to deal with some care, but it's all good, and Julian can obviously pick up with no problem. And yes, I'm glad that he mentioned Jump Into the Light and all of that, because they've been very supportive, and that's a new independent company that's on the Lower East Side. So
yeah, so I mean, I want to actually explain the context. So Clayton's wife, Elsa, she unfortunately has Alzheimer's, and since the pandemic started, you know, they're alone. They're alone in the Lower East Side. They don't have any help. So it's really also a very tough time for him. So I'm actually very thankful that he's able to be with us here and to talk. And but yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy.
You make it much easier for me, I'll tell you that. And he's obviously the pickup guy, so
we're trying.
I know that,
but yeah, so the cover, basically, if you download the app at RT Vive, you will be able to actually see Clayton. I mean, you're now lucky that you have a conversation with him, but this is actually something also for eternity, that there is this virtual reality aspect of it, that you can see Clayton, you can, you know, it's a 45-second clip, and it's something that I have not seen for any other graphic novel done, so it's very innovative, and really we try to be creative in the storytelling for this graphic novel. It's very different than any of my other books, but we're really playing with a lot of different storytelling ideas.
Another thing that was interesting and important with this is that it's, 18 different artists made it. Like the first one, you know, I'm now in my 70s, so I'm thinking about the end game. And so I told Julian, look, we got to get this done really quickly. So, you know, in the end, we ended up getting 18 artists. And the thing that holds it together is the whole storyline done by Julian.
Yeah.
So it's his story, but so it all works as one rhythm, because each period, it's almost like following you when you're growing up. You know, when you're 12 years old, you wear one style of clothes. When you're 20, you have another. So it's almost, the breakups like that work really well.
Yes.
And, but it's all held together by the storyline. So it's original in a lot of ways. I think with the cover, with the trying to move into the 21st century with the VR and all of that. We got Julian's storytelling. It was a big deal for me to get called the Godfather Lower East Side documentary, because I had to prove that to him.
We get to this. Hold on 1 second. That's actually the next slide. I will get to this. But yes, so just to stay with the cover, and we go to the subtitle of the book. So the cover was done, a big shout out to Fabrice Sapolsky. He is the co-creator of Spider-Man Noir. And also it shows a little bit. So he designs the cover, and he also did the interior design of the book. And it shows also how this is really a grassroots collective work, because people came together, some very experienced like Fabrice. I mean, he's like a veteran of the industry, and others who had not done anything before. So it really is like a whole mix of experiences, but all work collectively to do it. So the subtitle of the book is Godfather of Lower East Side Documentary. And here we go. Clayton, you can tell where the subtitle comes from.
Well, it was interesting because I didn't go to him. He came to me. It was like the Oprah show. They came to me as well. So I had a dope bag. I have a heroin bag collection. And he was, he's really an amazing person, because, I mean, any show I've been on, he's like one of the most famous people, where everybody says, oh, you were with Bourdain. And we were the last show of his, Places Unknown. It was the Lower East Side. And for him, it was kind of like coming home. And he had been involved in, when he was young, in the hard drug business. He was into heroin. So there was a particular brand I had in my collection called Toilet. And that's from like 3rd and C, I believe. And anyway, he was really interested. And so I found that bag. So I hooked him up with 5 other people from the neighborhood. I got like skateboard guys, a tailor, a restaurant, different neighborhood people that, because I want to provide the sort of street cred people. And, other people he knew and got to, Kembra, Joe Coleman, Chris Stein from Blondie, Debbie Harry, Lydia Lunch, all of that. He found his way there. But anyway, so he called me the Godfather of Lower East Side Documentary. And it's sad because he was such an approachable guy, and I really feel like he would have supported our project.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, the episode aired after he committed suicide. We were hoping that he would contribute to preface or anything. Unfortunately, he died before. And also interesting, you see now how the door 161 Essex Street looks today. So it's in a way a continuation of the front door photography. See the picture. It's probably one of the last pictures of him.
Probably is. Probably is. It was his last, Parts Unknown show for sure.
Yeah.
And I have the Wild Style and Tattoo Messe shirt on there. That's the 20th anniversary.
Yeah. So.
Started in 95. And also the Edelweiss was the flower from the Badishal area. And it's also the song in, that's Julie Christie.
Oh, yeah, I know. Every American loves this movie, I think.
Yeah, it's American.
Yes. Is it The Sound of Music?
Yes.
It is The Sound of Music, yes.
Edelweiss flower.
So we are now in the final part of this presentation, and after this, we'll have some questions, but I want to show you how the graphic novel looks. So we have the first element, of course, I explained, because Clayton is a videographer, we wanted to have a video element with the augmented reality. We had the video element, but the book is actually done by different illustrators. So the thing that links it is actually a photo comic. So the book starts with a reporter, played by Sean Catedral, who's also one of the illustrators, coming to the Lower East Side to interview Clayton. And the idea was to do a photo comic, because as a homage, of course, to Clayton as a photographer, and these are all, of course, my photographs, but also to show Clayton's space. And this experience of someone coming into Clayton's space is very real, because as I said, Clayton's 161 Essex Street is like a community center. People always come, talk to Clayton, pitch ideas, brainstorm, and really he keeps the creative scene of the Lower East Side still alive, despite gentrification, despite all the changes. So the book starts really with this opening, and then it always goes back to the illustrated part. So it would start with this, and then the first illustrated part on his childhood would start. We don't show every artist, and I apologize for any of the artists who is now here on and sees this. Unfortunately, we can't show every artist's work, but we have an amazing mixture. Just some samples. So this is Jesse Lambert. He is a fine arts painter, and he's actually working right now on a biographical graphic novel. And he also on Instagram, Fourth Wall Comics, has a series where he deals with his experience during COVID-19. He lives in Jackson Heights, so close to Elmhurst Hospital, and it's actually very fascinating storytelling idea. But you know, it's a very beautiful style he has here. This is about Clayton's time studying art. Clayton, you want to comment a little bit about like your experience studying art in Canada?
Yeah, actually it started off as a terrible experience. You know, my first initiation into art, it was my big dream. I was going to really be an artist, and I loved the whole idea. And I met this high school art teacher that turned me on to art. It kind of changed my life, and I was kind of going in a bad direction. And it kind of really saved my life, really. And I hooked up with Elsa in 1972, so that became my partner for life. But the rest of it was kind of shitty. And anyway, I eventually got into teaching, and then I went to Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia was great because we came to New York for a weekend. And at that time, this was 1976, I realized I could come to New York because the New York seemed very accessible at that time. So I got that out of going to that art school. And they had a visiting artist program. So I learned a lot about New York there. And it got me to New York, and then came to New York City in '79. And basically lived on the Lower East Side ever since. And, you know, loved the Lower East Side. It was kind of like finding home. I was making it in Soho, found I didn't really like Soho, that whole environment. So came to the Lower East Side and sort of found myself in my home. And it felt like it fit. And I started documenting it and making art and doing all of that. And part of the art thing is, it's really important, is as an artist, you have to do whatever it is that you can do to survive. So for a while, for me, it was making hats. So making hats for me was making art.
Yeah.
So I put my art twist in it, and Elsa and all of us together making this thing, the photographs. It all adds up to being an artist. You have to survive by any means you can. Art is life, and life is art. So whatever you do as an artist is art. So sometimes you're taking pictures, sometimes you're making caps, sometimes you're doing drawings, sometimes you're doing paintings, you're doing whatever because you're an artist.
Yeah.
So you can't put down what you're doing at the time, because that's what you're doing. I've written articles, you know, all kinds of things. And it's all just making art in a different way. That's the big vision. The big vision is the whole.
Yeah.
So my whole.
Absolutely. So this illustration is the previous one by Sean Cathedral. And to illustrate a little bit also the differences in experience. So Sean actually is someone that I met when Ghetto Brother came out. We were at Mocha Fest. She bought a copy of the book, and we chit-chatted a little bit. We exchanged like email addresses. And she told me she always wanted to do a graphic novel, but she hasn't had like the motivation. So I worked with her on creating this art, and she is not only the model for the journalist who interviews Clayton in the Fumetti, but also she is the illustrator here, and she has probably the most pages in the book. So it's a beautiful, here 2 examples of her artwork. Here, Ray Felix. This is a scene about like one of your first art shows, and Ray Felix is the founder of Bronx Heroes. He is like a grassroots comic book artist, and who also helps now Clayton with its Etsy store. Let's just go to the next one. Tattoo Society. Actually, also Ray Felix and Chris Wilson, who is the artist of this chapter, they're both actually SVA alumni. Both told me that they actually went to SVA, so it's also a nice connection. But Clayton, about the Tattoo Society, tell us a bit more about, like, you know, since when tattoos were illegal and how it came about that tattoos
there was a situation in 1961 where there was a conflict between a city council person and a tattoo artist in Staten Island. Some say it's because she had a daughter that was too young, whatever. It became an aggressive thing, and so it became a them and us. And also you have to remember that period of time, tattooing was kind of like, you know, the Bowery. It was pretty underground. It was pretty kind of grimy, you know, tough guy stuff and all of that. So I'm sure the tattoo artist told her to piss off and whatever, and it didn't go anywhere good. So they had a court case in 61, and it took really until 66 before it became final on the books. But they agreed in 1961 not to tattoo until the appeal was done. That was their mistake, and they made that mistake. But they eventually lost all the appeals, and by 66, it was outlawed forever. And then in 1997, myself, Wes Wood from Unimax, and Catherine Freed, our city council people, was able to make it legal again. And then from that, eventually, in 1995, I got a note from this guy, Johan Uhr, and that turned into the Wild Style and Tattoo Message. That came out of the Tattoo Society. Tattoo Society basically opened tattooing up to a lot of young people. This was a transition time in tattooing. By the time you get into the late 70s, Spider Webb, who went to SVA, by the way, Annie Sprinkle went to SVA. They're all connected deep into the tattoo society and the tattoo world, and a big SVA sort of connection there. And actually, I think they even teach tattooing now in design, and I'm partially responsible for that SVA course, because once it was legal, they could then teach it as a course. If it wasn't legal, they wouldn't be allowed to. So
yeah,
that gave a proper position. So anyway, the Tattoo Society, all these artists came out of it, and all these shops, once it became illegal, once again, small independent businesses, you got like Daredevil came out of the Tattoo Society. Just about every shop in New York City in one way or another was connected to the Tattoo Society. And then once it was legal, I hooked up with Steve Bonji, Butch Garcia, and First Year Westwood, and they became the owners, and I became the organizer. And we did the International Tattoo Convention at Roseland Ballroom, which I did for 15 years after that.
All right.
The Tattoo Society, and I got drawn into the Tattoo Society because of the camera. I wanted to photograph tattoo people. So how do you do it? You bring them to you. So that's a trick for the photographers out there. Create a society and bring them to you. You like stamp collectors? Start a stamp collecting society. You start photographing people in their stamps. My thing was heroin bags. That was my stamps.
Sorry, speaking of the photographers in the audience, would it be okay if we open up to some Q&A?
Yes, I just want to show the last artist very quickly. So this is Summer Mcclinton. She also worked actually with Harvey Pekar. And of course, the concepts that we're using, for those who've seen the movie American Splendor, I mean, Harvey Pekar is like the godfather of like, autobiographical in underground comics. So in a way, anything that is biographical in comics has to, comes back to Harvey Pekar's American Splendor. So she worked with Harvey. This is like something on the Tompkins Square Riot, 2 pages, her style. Just wanted to show this, but yes, let's open it up. I'll end sharing my screen, and let's, for those, on Facebook, Clayton Graphic Novel, Instagram, Clayton LES is his site, and let's hear from the audience. Hopefully everybody orders their copy. I mean, it will take a bit longer to get it, but we hope that people will pick it up. Unfortunately, of course, it's not an event where we would have like the copies for you to pick up directly and to sign, but yeah, I'd love to, hopefully everybody will order their copy.
If you get them from the SD account, they'll be signed.
Yeah, that's the thing. We want to set it up on Clayton's Etsy account, and then we'll have signed copies.
And, Clayton has a kind of open door policy, accepting now the social distancing time, but would in a foreseeable future, could people drop by the Lower East Side and get to see a space and
it's best to
pop
send me
in,
an
say
email
hi?
first. It's best to send me an email because it gets to be a little bit, I want it to be possible. So send me an email first. My email is my name, Clayton Patterson, 2 T's, 161, my address at gmail.com. So yeah, send me an email, and yeah, we can certainly hook it up. I mean, I'm interested in certainly photographing people in front of my door. That's for sure.
And
I mean, it just seems like such a nice way to, stop by and get a copy of the book and also say hi. So
absolutely.
I mean, I'll certainly take you up on the offer at some point in the fall. I'm saying hi to everybody from Korea, where I am for the next few months. But let's get to the questions. From Brian.
I was in a Korean photo magazine, actually. I wish I could remember the name of it, but it was like a high-level Korean magazine for photography.
Does the name Sajin Yesul ring a bell? Was that?
Could be. It was like one of the top Japanese Korean things. And actually, speaking of the Orthodox, because Julian documented Williamsburg, there was a guy started off in Williamsburg. It's a long story how I got to the Williamsburg Satmar, but the Orthodox, the Hasid. But there was a guy there, Ephraim Schneider, and he's on my Facebook. He's a Facebook friend. He's an ultra-Orthodox Hasid now, but he studied art in Korea. And he's very minimalist. And he could be an interesting person for you to look up, certainly on Facebook, Ephraim Schneider, because he was Korea Orthodox, if you have any interest in that, and art. So it's a very strange mixture. And he also did, the alphabet on Strommel caps, because he worked at a Strommel factory for a while. And so I have some Strommel boxes where they keep the big Strommel, the hat, that big fur hat that they wear.
Yeah.
And so that's a crossover between Julian, Korea, and actually the guys that made Capture did a movie on there was a gaming industry which people are addicted to in Korea, and he did one of this couple. They did a documentary, and the couple, their baby actually died because they left it at home because they were so addicted to this game. It's a documentary on Korean game addiction. It's actually very interesting. The guy's name is Dan Levin. But yeah, we have a lot of overlapping, and you see, that's the idea of community. And that's sort of the idea for kids, because photography, you have to learn. See, one thing you have to be able to do as a photographer, and Julian is very good at that, and that's pitching. Because generally you're an independent for the most part. Most photography in one way or another is related to one way or another being an independent. So learning how to pitch is really important, and that's sort of sending out the hook to get the story. And so all of these overlaps, you know, and so you have to start thinking overlaps. Okay, Korea, art, Hasid, Ephraim, you know, so it's mixing and matching all the parts is how you sort of survive. And that's why that graphic novel that we did with all those 18 different artists, it all blends together because of Julian's writing. So the overall style of it all comes together with one flow. So it's really kind of learning how to be an independent and surviving and mixing things up. That's what's really important, to surviving as an artist and as an independent and as a photographer.
And finding your own community, as you put it before. It's not necessarily the community where you were born to. It can be a community you choose to belong to.
Or you fall into, like me with the Lower East Side. Or by chance meeting Julian. And, you know, thankfully, we've overlapped in a number of different communities and interests. Kind of starting with photography.
It's great to hear a message of openness and community and curiosity and collaboration. So thank you guys for that. We do have some questions here. First question that I have is from Brian N. Asking, can Clayton talk about how gentrification has changed the neighborhood?
You got 2.5 hours, no problem. I can go on about that one for a long time. Basically, it's changed the heart and soul of everything. Bloomberg kind of with 3 terms, and you know, he really did a lot of damage. And the international corporate takeover is probably the biggest. The loss of the independence, the international corporate takeover, and the homogenization of everything. Those are kind of the big demons that changed the whole thing. And so our hope is that somehow we can get back to the independence, the chance for an individual to make it themselves again, and the chance to be able to make it in New York again. So, you know, the gentrification changed all of that. You know, now it's big tech companies. Now it's Amazon and Google, and they're like dominating the landscape, and they're the monsters. They're like bringing Walt Disney to town. Here we have Disneyland, here we have Amazon land, and here we have Google land. And it all just sort of eats up the whole environment to creativity and everything else. And so we want to come back to grassroots. Grassroots is very important for us.
Hannah Stapleman had a follow-up question to that as well, and she wanted to know specifically how that's affected the work that you do.
Well, for a long time, it was hard for me to adjust, obviously, because most of my roots were all drying up and disappearing and dying. You know, I mean, social intermingling changed completely. Our neighborhood became a bar neighborhood for hip, new kind of frat boy neighborhood drinking holes. So that was of little interest. And then, you know, the coffee shops all disappeared. They turned into Starbucks and places where people go internally. They go there to be on their Facebook or whatever. So the common coffee shop and all that stuff started disappearing. And I mean, it's very difficult for new people, because one thing about breaking into a neighborhood is you have to find the way to inch your way in. It kind of starts off at the grocery store. But, you know, once you sort of plasticize all the grocery stores and you make them into Korean delis or whatever, it stops being community centers and starts becoming just places where you go, you buy coffee, a chocolate bar, and you leave. So social meeting became much different, and it's, you know, I think people became much more dependent on the cell phone, and that's why it's a totally insular world. Everybody's just now looking down their cell phones and communicating and whatever. So how we communicate, how we get along, how we meet each other, all that's changed so radically. And I had to change with it, essentially. And it's taken me, I started off, with the whole 80s thing really was the beginning of the major anti-gentrification movement. And it really kept on. I'm trying to get out of all that now with art and other things. But it affected my life deeply and greatly. And, as an artist, it became a big part of my concentration and who I am. So I sort of rolled along with it.
What could New York do better, to protect community life? And, do you have any sense of that? Not to put you on the spot or anything,
back to the independence. We got to support it's all about support. People are the economy, and they're always talking about the economy being this abstract thing, which it is, but we are the economy. Whether you're spending $1 a day or $100 a day, we are what makes up the economy. The subway, the theater tickets, the restaurants, the donuts, the bagels. It's like, we're it. The sneakers, everything, we're it. So it's the economy. And if people could redirect their money towards buying independence, the world would just be a better place. Mm-hmm. If we could get back to just buying from individuals and supporting each other rather than just the big corporations, we would be much better off. And if we could get back to that mentality, then we could start making it, maybe affordable again and possible to live here and have New York be great again, or America be great again. This whole thing about even this making the books, the whole getting back to the craft thing. Mm-hmm. People could just, it would be great if people could start indulging in like hobbies again and crafts again and making things at home and becoming independently productive. Not to be too utopian or whatever. And, we just don't have any political leadership. Bernie was on the loser's road right from the beginning by calling it socialism. Get rid of the socialism concept. Tell them, say you want to be like every other free country in the world, whether it be Israel or Denmark or Sweden or Norway or Portugal or Cuba or whatever. They all take care of their education and the medical of the population, because it's the population that makes the country. So take care of the population, they take care of the country. And what's wrong with having a ceiling? Why do you have to make $100 billion? What's wrong with making $1 billion? Why does Bloomberg keep needing more? When he started, the $1 a year trick. The one thing about New York, it's great. It's good with the con game. You can get to be a good connier. Trump is a con and Bloomberg was a con. And Bloomberg's con was, I'll do it for $1 a year. And everybody thinks, wow, that's great. He's rich. He doesn't have to work for the money. He tripled his billions in office. He tripled his billions. Not his hundreds, not his thousands, not his millions, his billions. So I'll take one of those $1 a year salary. It's all a con job. So the point is, we got to get away from the big guy and get back to the little guy. And it isn't about socialism and a communist takeover. It's about all of us working to make it work. It's about the independence. It's about the do your own thing. It's about making stuff happen ourselves.
On that note, I just want to turn it back to Julian in this kind of variety of voices that you recruited to, it's very appropriate what, just coming straight from what Clayton is saying to the idea that there's multiple graphic artists involved in the project. Can you talk a little bit about that concept?
Yeah, no, the idea was really to build also community. I really thought the idea of having people and one thing was very important. None of the artists, everybody was introduced to Clayton. I thought it was important that they don't just see it as a job, especially since nobody got paid, but really just like to meet with Clayton and really being convinced about the project and really building community. And there was really also like an internal support that some people were more experienced who basically worked on their first, they worked on stuff and had a quick turnaround. Other people did it for the first time, but people supported each other, and it was really had a lot of of the do-it-yourself spirit. Initially, we were thinking about doing like a Kickstarter campaign or Indiegogo or something and self-publish it. We're fortunate enough that Permuted Press was very excited about the project. We got like a traditional publisher who created like a nice hardcover coffee table book. Unfortunately, we can't show it to you right now, but the idea was really to do something very grassroots, and it really fits. Oh yeah, Clayton has a book. I'm not sure if maybe if you take off the background, maybe you can. Yeah, I think you can see it. If Jaime, if you can switch to Clayton's screen, then he can show the book maybe. Now he's disappearing in there. But yeah, so the idea was really.
If he says something, he'll pop back up on the big screen.
Yeah, Clayton, say something and show the book.
Okay, here we are. We got the book. It's coming at you with the large screen at some point. Maybe yes, maybe no. Here we go.
Maybe take off your background.
I want to point out one thing about presidential politics, and that is this book was held up December 15th on the border of China. It was not allowed to leave. It was stuck in the port, December 15th. Now, if there were germs on this book, in the 3 weeks or whatever it would take for the boat to go from the slow boat from China to New York, the viruses would all be dead. It wasn't until mid-March that they closed the airport, the people, the real carriers of the virus, to the country. So the book was held up in China in the port on December the 15th, but people were allowed to travel till mid-March. Figure that one out, Mr. Dillon. Golly.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I mean, we were aware of the coronavirus way before anybody else, because like everything else, unfortunately, the book was also produced in China, and we got a notification. So basically everything was meant to be done by the Chinese New Year. And we got the information in December that there's some virus somewhere in China and there's some delays. So we were aware of the coronavirus since December. Because
the book population, then New York wouldn't be in the condition it is right now. And so our books showed us that they knew in mid-December, December 15th,
yeah,
shut it down.
That's true. So if our book had been published before, everything would be much better. So now we're waiting for the book to arrive. But
we have the book in politics.
Yeah.
Well, we are certainly waiting for that book to arrive as well. And I want to thank you both so much for coming on tonight and for sharing your creative process and your insights about life in the city across generations, and about, the importance of listening
We're
to
really
the voice of the
honored
community.
to be part of SBA, I'll tell you that. It's really a pleasure to be part of SBA. SBA has such an incredible history, and it's such a landmark place that it's just, like I say, my world has certainly been intersected with SBA. I mean, Keith Haring was SBA, Spider Webb was SBA, Annie Sprinkle was SBA. I think Steve Bonja took an SBA photography course there. I mean, I've known David Sandlin and Seth Tabachman, a lot of people that have taught there. Yeah, SBA is a very important part of downtown New York culture.
Well, you're part of the family now, and specifically part of our Masters in Digital Photography program at SBA. And please stay in touch and keep us posted. And I will definitely write you and come visit sometime and get my copy straight from the Lower East Side.